Welcome to All Grown Up Now, a tale of retail, relocation, revenge, reinvention, reckless behavior, really good clothes, indiscretion, infidelity, domestic violence, and one kidnapping. I'm Kenneth D. King, podcasting from my studio near Union Square in New York City. This podcast is another in a series of installments from a novel I wrote called All Grown Up Now, A Friendship in 3 Acts, available on Amazon.com. It's the story of a small-town boy who dreams of being a grown-up and his journey to get there. Each week, you'll hear another installment of this story. I am pleased to announce that BearWorldMagazine.com will be one of the sponsors of all of the episodes going forward. In the last episode, we left Mark and Ken on an airplane from Los Angeles to San Francisco. Episode 24, titled The Boy Who Fell to Earth. The time, April of 1995. The place, San Francisco. Perhaps I should fill you in on the 5-year gap between Act 2 and Act 3. When I last spoke to Mark in 1990, 5 years before, I was right at the cusp of success. I had a spiffy apartment and sold to the very posh store in Los Angeles where all of the rich and famous bought my work. Eventually, there were those who sought me out in my fashionable South of Market studio to commission pieces. I had my first pieces go into museum shows and museum permanent collections. My hats were on music videos and soda commercials played all over the world. My work showed up on the red carpets of the Oscars and Grammys. Life was fun, and I was very pleased with myself. Because of my career choice, I had a good life. Once I was able to trade a ball gown for my new convertible. And the checks from the very posh store and private commissions kept me in expensive sunglasses, watches, and shoes. All in all, good times. From a fashion standpoint, I had found a look for myself, a uniform of sorts, somewhat like Miss Anne had done in her later years. Mine was very short, bleached, white blonde hair to hide the gray and the hair loss, black t-shirts or turtlenecks depending on the season, black jeans, good tailored jackets, great shoes, good sunglasses, good watches. The watches, in my mind, replaced the jewelry I had to melt down in the lean years to fill the orders. It was a look that I could go to work in comfortably, but would look hip and appropriate if I had to go to lunch with a drop-in customer or to an event after work. It may not have been as wacky or inventive as my clothes from younger years, but it was a look that worked, and besides, I spent my creative efforts making clothes for other people. However, things had started crashing to earth of late. In the fashion biz, people love someone because they're new and different, which was me when I started selling to the very posh store. Then, as it happens in the creative fields, the store wanted to turn me into something they thought I should be. Then came the design by committee, and then the comment, "His work has lost its sparkle." That's where I was in early 1995. Creatively, I had said what I wanted to with this particular body of work, and I was trying out new ideas. The very posh store had its own ideas of my work. They wanted it different, but they wanted it to be the same. This is one of the dysfunctions of the fashion industry. All of this sucked the joy out of creating, and I increasingly felt like, why bother trying anything new? They won't like it anyway. That was the kiss of death. To make matters worse, my agent was siding with them, even though I had to remind her who signed her checks. I realized that if I were going to advance creatively, I'd have to completely leave this entire situation behind. My big mistake in this situation was this. Everybody along the chain needs to make money, but everyone made money from my creative output. Everybody forgot this key idea. And by everybody, I include me. All the money everybody made was generated by my ideas, and I lost sight of that. It was a huge mistake. So I fired the agent, dropped the store, and cut off 90% of my income. On other fronts, I was chosen to do a sewing show on PBS and made a name for myself in a different arena. I was teamed with Miss America 1961, Nancy Fleming, whose talent was sewing. Hand to God, look it up on the internet. She had her sewing as her talent. She was the host. I was the sewing teacher. Nancy taught me how to be comfortable on camera and was lovely, lovely, lovely. Then as now, I understand just why she was Miss America. So in a sense, I had other options. There was also a sewing book contract in the pipeline and traveling to lecture. Offshoots to my main career that it didn't involve flipping burgers or scrubbing toilets. So I was lucky. Creatively, however, my life was dark. I didn't want to create, as all the satisfaction of doing that had been drained away. In later years, if one were to put photos from my archive end to end, you could spot this period immediately. Everything I made during that period was black. No color. And eventually some came to believe that I had never worked with color. Now, my last and final meeting with the owner of the very posh store was like going 20 rounds with a sumo wrestler. I had dressed in my most intimidating fashion as armor outfit, white blonde hair, big-shouldered navy blue pinstripe Dolce & Gabbana jacket, black turtleneck, black leather jeans, fast, pointy black boots, Rolex watch. He was dressed in a nondescript brown soiled schmata and trousers and surrounded by a cloud of very expensive Scotch fumes. The beginning went cordially enough until he started lecturing me about firing Brenda, my agent. "She was like a sister to me," he boomed. "You have no right to fire someone who has done so much for you, and after all I've done for you." That sent me ballistic, but quietly so. "That business relationship is between Brenda and me," I responded. "And besides, you've taken a markup," I said softly. "What? What did you say?" he jumped. "You didn't buy these pieces just because you're a nice guy. You made money on them," I calmly stated, "and quite a lot." Now, retail is like a dysfunctional family. In both the dysfunctional family and retail, there are certain issues one shouldn't bring up. In the family, it might be that daddy drinks. In retail, any mention of money, as in the making of it, or the paying out of it by the stores, is considered, well, unseemly. The pretense is that we are all just in it for the love of fashion. Indeed. When I mentioned that he had made money, the tone of the conversation veered 180 degrees. Smiling, he said brightly, "I saw your gown on display at the entrance of the exhibit at the LA County Museum of Art." "If I remember correctly, you said that that gown was stupid," I responded. And as they say, things went from bad to worse. When my audience was over, I took a deep breath and said a quick prayer that I would get out of there without my knees collapsing, with my dignity intact. Head held high, I walked out of the store, got into the rental car, drove a block or so away, and then pulled over and had a good cry. I had just jettisoned 90% of my business. I at least had my teaching and private clients, or so I thought. The trip to Paris that I had just come back from was the disaster. As I said, I went with one of my top-paying custom clients, and I learned that one should never, never, never travel with clients. As I said earlier, this blow-up resulted in me losing her as a client forever. Great. Another blow to my cash flow. As an aside, though, something good did come out of that disastrous trip. Through a chain of circumstances, I was able to get into John Galliano's atelier. I had met the head of his workroom a year or so before while social climbing. The timing was perfect. He had just shown his collection the evening before, and I just showed up uninvited. The man remembered me and invited me back in a few days to look at the clothes. I had an epiphany after seeing those clothes. I understood that I couldn't be John Galliano because he was the best Galliano there was, but in my own way, with my own thing, I was determined to create things that I would proudly put up next to what I saw there. And that was my lifeline later on, when things got really dark. Aside from losing my top-paying store and private client, all wasn't really gloom and doom. As I said, I did have the PBS show, the lectures, and the book deal, so I could sustain myself while I was finding my way creatively and licking my wounds. Not how I planned my career trajectory, but there you have it. So, there I was, suffering from creative block, facing a complete change in my career, and contemplating possible financial ruin. Well, perhaps I exaggerate a bit, but it felt like that. Life was looking very unstable and unsettled, and I was feeling disoriented and battered by events. And now, I found myself on a plane with the trembling man who I had just impulsively kidnapped. And how did I feel? In short, I was scared out of my wits. We landed in San Francisco to rain and gloom. It seemed somehow fitting for what was happening. In the car, coming home from the airport, Mark asked, "What can I do to repay you, Ken? You've saved my life." "Oh, Mark, let's not get all dramatic. I ask that you get into therapy, though, because therapy can help you recover from this, as well as figure out how you got into it in the first place and how not to do it again. I'm not a professional, just a friend, and I can help only so much. So, I insist you get into therapy." I knew I didn't have the psychological resources to do the entire job. The first order of business when we got back was to call Robert. I got on first to tell him that Mark was here and okay, and then I handed the phone to Mark. They talked for a while, but soon I heard a change in the tone of Mark's voice. It sounded anxious and a little worried. "He's not sure the family can give me any help," Mark said after hanging up. "He tells me that David is having none of this drama and won't be sending any money to help out. Ken, what'll I do? I don't have anything." "Oh, don't worry about that now. We'll think of something," I responded cheerily. "But now, we need to go to Kuav to introduce you to the people there and get you into their system. Then you need to start on the cream cheese and chocolate cake diet. We'll get a good start on that after we visit Kuav." And away we went, starting the long journey of Mark's escape from Victor. I figured that I had just ripped Mark out of a horrible situation. But by doing that, I had removed any trace of normalcy or purpose in his life, such as it was. Mark didn't work the last years in L.A., primarily because he was being held a prisoner of sorts by his own doing as well as Victor's. But still, in its horrible way, it was the devil he knew, whereas San Francisco was the devil he didn't know. I had to help change that for him. The next morning, as we had coffee at the corner cafe, I introduced him around and we settled in for breakfast. Then I gave him a task to complete, something to give him focus and purpose. Truthfully, I felt responsible for his situation, so I had to give him some structure to work with. "Here's a map of the city," I said, removing the map from the shopping bag I had with me. "Your job this month is to choose a neighborhood, go there, and explore it. You can take more than one day to a neighborhood if you like, but your first task is to reacquaint yourself with the city." Next, I pulled a box of pastel pencils and a sketchbook out of the bag. "If you see something that you want to draw or are inspired by," I said, "here's something to keep you company." So for the next 2 weeks, Mark and I had coffee in the morning, then he went off to explore. It was a real challenge for him. Of late, he wasn't used to even going outside, let alone going to unfamiliar places by himself. The fear that Victor would appear was a very real one. Since L.A. wasn't that far away, and with Victor being crazy, it was likely that he might appear out of nowhere. but Mark had a task to do, and to his credit, he went out every day and covered the city. In the meantime, I had to deal with his family. The day after Mark arrived, I called Robert. "So what is this I hear about your family not wanting to help out here?" I shouted. "Well, David, is tired of Mark's dramas and told everyone else not to help." "Oh, stop. Does David rule over everyone else?" I asked. "And what do you think about all of this?" "Well," Robert said, "I'm not rich, and I can't." I said, "Can't what? When I had you on the phone not 2 days ago, I told you I'd help, but I'm not rich either. I won't hang Mark out to dry, but I'm not going to do this alone. You blathered on about blood being thicker than water and his family and all in all when he was still in L.A. Was that all talk?" No, Robert said. "Well, then put up or shut up. Get him back on the phone. Mark is going to need at least first and last month's rent for a place to live. He can stay with me for a while, but I live in a very small place and will get charged extra rent if he stays too long. Like I said, I'm not going to hang him out to dry, but you have to help." The very idea. I was certainly exasperated by this and felt like I'd been given the bait and switch. That jerk. Did he think I was just going to let him get off scot-free? It wasn't 2 hours later that Robert called back, singing a happier tune. It seems he stood up to the hateful David, reminding him that when one goes on and on about family, as David had a tendency to do, part of that is actually backing words with action. David sanctimoniously blathered on to me about family a few weeks later, the prick, and then didn't follow through with what he promised to do. It took a couple of weeks, but Mark had some funds to start looking for a place. In the meantime, Mark slept on a futon on my living room floor. He shared the futon with Daisy. They took to each other immediately, and Mark became Uncle Marky to her. He lavished all sorts of mothering on her, giving her treats, playing ball, and rubbing her tummy when they were both napping on the futon. Now, Daisy knew something was amiss with Mark. She hovered protectively, following him around the apartment. The first few nights he was living with us, I would hear him starting into a nightmare. Daisy would jump up, rush onto his futon, and start licking his face to wake him up. I'd watch her, sitting sentry over him, until he went back to sleep. I learned later that Mark had 2 Yorkies, Shayna and Freeway, who were now gone. He kept their photos in his wallet. That was all that was left of them. At first, I didn't know what became of them and knew somehow it wasn't the time to ask. But later, Mark told me. Daisy already knew. One day, Victor got it into his head that the dogs had to go, like Mark's dog Danielle when they moved to San Francisco. I remembered that Mark wouldn't tell me what happened, just that Danielle was given away. But later, he told me what had happened to Danielle, as the same thing happened to the 2 Yorkies. Victor took them to the pound and had them put down. When he got home, he beat Mark because it cost money to have them murdered. Jesus. Mark's sleeping in my living room proved fortuitous a few days later. He woke me one morning about 6, saying, "Ken, there's something you need to see in the kitchen." The lights were on. As I walked into the kitchen, I heard water running, and I looked up to see it cascading out of my upper kitchen cabinets like Niagara Falls. As I dialed the apartment manager, I could see the water starting to drip from the living room ceiling. Daisy started barking and running around, looking thoroughly confused. "Oh my God, Mark, get on the end of that sofa. Let's get this out of here," I shouted. My sofa was the one expensive piece of grown-up furniture I had in the apartment, from the 1930s, reupholstered in mohair velvet at great expense. The 2 of us just got it out in time for the storm to break. There started a rainstorm in my apartment that looked like monsoon season in the tropics. But rain in the tropics doesn't look and smell like stale urine. By that time, the apartment manager had come and was furiously emptying out glasses from my kitchen cabinets that were filling with this nasty water. Why, I don't know. He wasn't too quick, if you know what I mean. Don't you think you should shut off the water? I shouted as water poured down around us. Yeah, I guess so. Good idea, he stammered. After the rain stopped and the flood abated, I dressed, figuring I was awake and wouldn't be going back to bed soon. Besides, the bed and all the bedding were saturated completely with that nasty, foul-smelling water, as was the closet and all of my clothes and shoe boxes. Now, thankfully, I keep my shoes in the boxes. That's what saved them. The rain diminished and eventually stopped, leaving the entire place a wet, stanky-smelling mess with water-streaked walls, ruined window shades, and a nasty sludge on the hardwood floor. Mark had a panicked look on his face. He looked as if he felt he had done something wrong and started to apologize for waking me. I started to laugh. Mark looked confused. Even Daisy looked confused. What else can I do? I asked. Aren't you upset? Mark asked. Well, Mark, yes, but now really, what else can I do? If I didn't laugh right now, I could get really, really upset. So let's go have breakfast and then clean this mess up later. Later, when the plumber left, I heard what happened. The landlady, who was notoriously and enthusiastically cheap, had the manager, who, as I said earlier, was not a plumber by trade or pretension nor the brightest porch light on the block, fix a pipe in the unit upstairs to save a few bucks. The repair held for about 10 hours. So not only did she have to pay for the repair to be done properly, she was going to have to pay to have my place dried out, repaired, and painted, to replace my damaged furnishings, and to have all of my clothes cleaned. It took the better part of a month to get it all done. A couple of days later, Victor called the studio, as he didn't have my home phone, to ask for Mark. He's not here, I said. He went home to Boston. Now, Ken, take a deep breath. You sound nervous, Vic said. Anyone would be nervous talking to a nutcase like you. Victor, go to hell, and don't call back here, I shouted, and I hung up. I felt just like I did in the days when Mom and Don were together and fighting. The same churning in the stomach, the same weak knees. It was like Dances with Landmines, the remake. Robert and I made an agreement to have Vic send any communication to Robert's fax, and Robert would then forward it to me. That way, I wouldn't have to give out a fax number, as I was sharing one with my studio partner, Marshall. The faxes started in earnest on day 6 and were a regular occurrence for the next 6 weeks, drastically increasing my expense for fax paper. They were of printouts on a dot matrix printer, of chats that Mark was supposed to be having with various men, all of the while making fun of Victor. There were handwritten notes faxed to Mark as well. These faxes centered on several themes. I love you so much and want you back, and I'll be good, I promise. And you had this whole thing planned for a long time because you've been playing around on me, you devious SOB. And I've been so good to you for all these years to be so cruelly treated now. And finally, I'll get you back one way or the other. You'll never get away. It was astonishing to read some of these missives, as they would whipsaw back and forth from one theme to another, sometimes in mid-sentence. Usually they were written in Vic's psychotic scrawl on unlined paper, but occasionally they were typed. When they were typed, there was, again, usually an attachment of some computing chat line conversation, proof that Mark was out there in cyberspace hustling guys and making fun of Vic. I wasn't online then, as this was 1995. For me, the fax machine was as up-to-date as I cared to be. My computer was one step up from the stone tablet and chisel, a Macintosh SE with a screen the size of a postcard. Mark had no access to any computer other than mine. Then there were the accusations that I had stolen Mark away to have him for myself. Now, Victor wasn't the only one who thought Mark and I were an item. Casual acquaintances and some of the people we needed to interact with to get Mark help assumed that I was his new significant other. The assumption was that the only reason I was helping out was because we were sleeping together. Several times I was asked about this. Now, my response was always an exasperated version of, I'm good-looking enough, with enough on the ball, that I don't have to go to such extraordinary lengths to kidnap a boyfriend. Jesus. Besides, I never had any interest in him that way, absolutely not. But now, especially now, Mark was too damaged. I knew what he would put up with Victor, and over time found out more than I ever wanted to know, oh my God. And I knew that any relatively sane man would seem like heaven to him compared to Victor. Sadly, though, Mark got it into his head that we might one day become an item. He broached the subject one day by telling me of a dream he had the previous night. I could see that coming a mile away. In this dream, we ended up doing it after circumstances I don't remember, and then there was a tentative inquiry as to if it might be possible one day, as he felt safe with me. Mark, you're a nice guy, but only in your dreams, I said firmly. It wouldn't work for me, and it wouldn't be good for you. Besides, some of the things I like to do would scare you so bad you'd leave the continent. Little did I know, until he told me later, some of what Victor put him through made me want to flee the continent. Victor had a burglar alarm business with a guy who I'll refer to as Big and Dumb. Now, Big and Dumb was a former child actor who didn't make the transition to grown-up roles, probably because he was, dumb. Mark called Big and Dumb one day after he arrived in San Francisco to tell him that he, Mark, wasn't with Victor anymore and, therefore, wasn't watching the business. That's what Mark did during his last years in L.A. While Victor would go out to carouse, Mark was the man on call if there was a problem with the burglar alarms. He also dealt with all the books and accounts, so he had intimate knowledge of how it all worked. Mark told Big and Dumb that he should research how the business was set up. Victor set things up so that only he had access to the accounts and didn't do any kind of regular reporting to Big and Dumb or any outside auditor. Big and Dumb was okay with this because he trusted Victor. See why I call him Big and Dumb? Also, Big and Dumb worked for a competing burglar alarm company and had a non-compete clause in his contract. If they knew he was a partner in a competing concern, he'd get fired. So Victor agreed to keep quiet about that. Indeed. Now, this is what we call plot material. You're going to need this later. Big and Dumb thought that Victor was piling up all of Big and Dumb's share of the profits in a bank account so he could claim them in the future. Until then, they were safe, weren't they? Victor wouldn't steal from him. So Mark tried to let Big and Dumb know that no, they weren't safe. Vic was spending the money and not setting any aside. Well, I don't want to get involved in your disagreement, Big and Dumb drawled. I'm not asking you to get involved. I'm just telling you to watch out for yourself or you'll have nothing, Mark shouted. Big and Dumb later came to regret not listening to this warning. In the next episode, Mark and Ken do a commando raid to rescue Mark's possessions. Thanks for listening. I'd like to thank BearWorldMagazine.com for sponsoring this podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Play. If you have questions, you can reach me through the website allgrownupnow.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Kenneth D. King, on Facebook at Kenneth D. King Design, or on my main website, KennethDKing.com.